So thank you to you both for joining us. We're joined by Paul Scoones, who's a published author and a New Zealand resident expert on Doctor Who, and of course, Richard Loseby. So, Richard, if I can start with you again, um, how did you get into this quite zany Doctor Who commercial that was shot in 1996?
Yeah, 1996, a long time ago. Well, I'm a writer like Paul. I'm a published author, and but I've worked all my life, in advertising for my sins. And gosh, 1996, I was obviously in New Zealand. Prior to that, I'd been working in the UK in London, and I was at the time I was working for myself, so I was a freelance creative, not attached to any advertising agency, but I had a connection with a client who wanted me to come up with some ideas for a retirement superannuation product that they were generating, and that was called New Zealand Superannuation Services, and it was out of a much bigger, insurance sort of company and financial company, and I thought, well, they've got some money, I should spend it, and I should come up with a big idea, and that big idea turned out to be Tom Baker and Doctor Who. In other words, who better to talk about the future than somebody who's already been there?
Was there much sort of resistance to your idea, or did they sort of go with the idea, the superannuation
Well,
services?
it's a good question. I actually had a backup idea because I thought it might be a bit crazy for them because they're a financial institution, and they don't do sort of wacky stuff. But I went through the first idea, the backup, and they were sort of nodding, and it was a big boardroom with 20 people around this, in a big U shape, and I was up the front with this whiteboard, and I wasn't really getting a lot of feedback. And then I thought, okay, move on, and onto the second idea. And I literally just launched it like I had just done to you. Who better to talk about the future than somebody who's already been there in the form of a Time Lord? And their jaws just dropped. I don't know, maybe there were some fans in there. They were quite older, but in the end, they all of them just were smiling and wanted to hear more and wanted to know whether it was possible. And at that point, I said, well, let's go and find out.
So what happened then? Did you contact the BBC, or did the
Uh,
superannuation services contact the BBC, or how did that
no, I
work
had a
out?
contact because I'd only been recently in London, and I was over there for about 8 years. And I had a good friend and contact who was still in the business. And uh, I went home and gave him a phone call, and he had some contacts at the BBC, and I think and actually did a lot of sort of the work from being so much closer, getting in touch with the agent, Tom Baker's agent, and those sort of basic things to start the conversation rolling. Of course, we had to negotiate with the BBC, so we had to go to their marketing department, and eventually I jumped on a plane and went over there, and actually took my young, new family with me as well. And um, I mean, it was just felt like a good opportunity to go back to London as well. I didn't really feel very confident about getting the rights to the music and the TARDIS from the BBC. And nor did my contact over there. He said, well, we'll give it a go. And if it's a complete failure, we'll have a pint at the pub afterwards and commiserate our sorrows. But lo and behold, he started getting some quite positive feedback. And it turns out that the BBC were getting some heat from the government to be more commercial. And I think they must have sat around and looked at this possibility of selling the rights to a company in New Zealand as like, well, who's going to ever see it? You may as well, it's just New Zealand. And they were sort of, we had a meeting, phone calls, and then some money was being bandied around, and some, and by Tom Baker's agent, and we hadn't spoken to him, but the money was, I was feeding this back to New Zealand, back to the client, and they were sort of nodding their heads, and I was thinking, wow, okay, so they have deep pockets. And I think it wasn't, I think the moment where it dawned on me this was actually happening was when I was in the BBC in the wardrobe department talking to Tom Baker's wardrobe stylist from back in the day and holding the scarf that had been brought out for me, that would be allowed to. I think it almost had to have a seat on the plane itself. It was that crucial. And then we were off and running. And then the last person I had to persuade was, of course, Tom himself. But it turned out he didn't need any persuading. He was absolutely up for it.
Did you meet Tom, or did you just meet his agent?
No, I never met the agent. I only met Tom, and we met at Angel Sound Studios, which I think in Soho. I think I vaguely remember it being in Greek Street or somewhere. And I was there first. You step in off the street, that busy Soho street, straight into the reception, sit down, and I was just sort of kind of anxiously holding a pen that I was ready to sort of take some notes. And the door bursts open, and in strides this fantastic person, this just famous but larger than life character, turns around, waves at the receptionist, looks at me and says, "Richard." I was like, okay, this is Hollywood now. This is not Hollywood. This is someone with great presence, and he immediately, it's quite crazy. He's a little bit mad. He started interrogating me about the pen I was holding, which was literally just not a ballpoint, but something that we use in advertising. That's just an art pen. And he wanted to know whether it was what it was, and was it a famous brand? And I can't remember. He was disappointed to hear that it wasn't sort of like a $1,000 pen or something. He always wanted to meet someone who had expensive pencils and pens. And we hadn't even shaken hands at that point. And that's how Tom rolls. I mean, he is just a larger than life character.
Well, of course, we met him later on. Paul, have you any questions about that part of the process, Richard?
Absolutely.
In London.
I'm sure fascinating to hear this. The first question that springs to mind, listening to what you're saying, Richard, is absolutely fascinating. Is did you have a backup plan if Tom had said no? Obviously, you come up with the idea for a Doctor Who commercial, but if you hadn't got Tom, did you have another actor in mind?
No, I think we were all in, and
right.
As
it was only ever going to be Tom then, was it?
Yeah, it was. There was no question. I don't think John Pertwee was still around. I'm not sure. Maybe he was, but Tom.
Well, he died early '96, so he would have recently.
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
and I think Tom was the one that I was thinking about. I don't even know who came after Tom, but he's just that name that sort of, and we knew we had to get, and happily he wasn't working. He wasn't, his career had kind of finished. He wasn't. He had a resurgence, I think, in the 2000s, and but at the time, the one thing I remember about Tom was that his character, the Time Lord, he was, it changed his life, and he was always thankful for the children and for the fans and for the opportunity to play this role, because it turned him. It was great fun. He had a ball. He had the life. That most actors would just only imagine or dream about. And so he was only too willing to put back on the clothes and which were all coming out of the wardrobe at the BBC. And there was, he wasn't going to come cheap. I mean, his agent probably, they just said 6 figures, but in sterling, not New Zealand dollars. It was, and
And it was first. It was
class,
first class. Yeah, I was going to
first
say that.
class seat,
Yeah,
and for
yeah.
his wife, his lovely wife, and I mean, that's jumping ahead, but his first class seat didn't work, but he didn't mind. He just rolled with it. He said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm going to sleep anyway. I don't needed to have all the buttons. For some reason, no one had plugged it in." But the great what you find is that as soon as Tom lands, he doesn't complain about that. It's a story that he has to tell the world. Doesn't matter who it is. There are, whether there be 3 people or 30. This is the story he's going to land with, and it's the first class seat that wasn't plugged in. Brilliant. Oh,
you get the impression talking to Tom that his life is just one constant stream of anecdotes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if you've heard him talk and be interviewed, and I heard by Parkinson or other people, like that, and he's pretty amazing. He's just off the top of his head, the stuff that rolls out is usually very eloquent and sometimes a bit crazy. He can sort of go off piste a little bit sometimes, but that's just who he is.
So when you pitched the original idea, the very first pitch meeting that you were talking about, where you had the 2 ideas and they went with the Doctor Who one, you were already talking about Tom at that point, yes?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was always part of the original plan.
What we normally do, just in case there's a client there who doesn't know or didn't ever watch Doctor Who, we always go with a photograph, like something we've found in a book or 1996. I don't think the internet was around.
No.
So we must have gone for a book and or a VHS or something, and that's just a sort of reference. So, and that would have been Tom. I'd never thought about anyone else. So it was meant to be.
Richard, at this stage, did Tom give any kind of specific ideas about how he wanted to play the character in New Zealand? Did he come up with any ideas, or was it still very early days of the contract and things like that?
No, he was going to be his character, and I wasn't ever going to toy with that. I even when I met him at Angel Sound, and when we went even at a very late stage, I'd been so busy negotiating and with my friend in London, with Duncan, we've been busy negotiating and thinking at any moment it's all going to fall over. I hadn't even written the scripts. And there's one other very important person that has to be involved in a big film production like this, is a director and a film company, which is Tiger Films, and they employed a director who I'm still good friends with and have actually sailed to Fiji with about 5 or 6 years ago, but that his name is John Toon, and he was a very well respected director and director of photography, a cameraman, and at the time we hadn't met at that stage. I just knew him by reputation, and I was in London, and we had done the deal. We'd signed on some agreements, and he said, I rang him up, and he had a cell phone, this is how amazing it was, because he was out on his boat up at Kowal in a storm, and he asked me to ring him back, and I'm on a landline in the flat in London. He asked me to ring him back because there was a storm brewing, and he said, he couldn't talk right now, and there was all this wind, and you hear the rain in the phone. And when I eventually did, he got the sails down, and he was anchored off in Kowal, and his first question was, "Where are the scripts? what am I filming?" And I went, "That's fine. I'm going to do that. It's just this is a courtesy call to introduce myself and tell you what's going on." But I think I had spent so much time thinking about it and talking about it, and then obviously with Tom, and there he was, that when it came to write those scripts of all of them, I think it happened in a day, maybe not even a day. It was the big ones were in the morning. It just fell out onto the typewriter, and might have been a typewriter. No, it must have been a computer. Yes, I had a laptop. I remember I had an Apple laptop, one of the really early ones, and when I'd finished the scripts, I faxed him I faxed them by a little modem through the phone line, and you hear all that chirpy sound effects back, and away they went. And then I think I added a few more later. But the big ones, that sort of impressive first big launch ad was written in that first few kind of minutes, really. It was quite for a writer. It's a special kind of time, and it just falls out.
How many scripts were there in total? Do you remember how many ads, different ads?
Well,
do you think?
I think I'm not too sure exactly how. There are eight.
Eight.
And
Eight?
I didn't write. We shot them all, including the little 15-seconders, which are actually turned out really well.
Right.
Because advertising it's 15 seconds or it's 30 seconds, and if you're lucky, you get longer than that. So, and I think we got a bit longer, but Tom, this is jumping way forward now. When we were shooting them, he was coming up with ideas, and I'm sort of going, well, I mean, I don't think we can afford the time. We haven't got hours. It's not a show. It's an ad. So it's got to be fitting into us, a short amount of time. And he'd go, fine, and then he'd come up with another idea. And I felt bad. I had to sort of stick to my script. But he would always, respect that. And there's only one time he said, no, I'm not saying that. And it was the moment where he steps out of the TARDIS on Mount Eden. And I can't even remember what it was then, but he comes out and he just ignores me completely, and he just goes, "Oh yes," and some great big glorious sort of thespian like entrance to New Zealand and the time and space, and it just stayed in everyone loved it. So, didn't make any sense, but it was like, what do you say when you're a Time Lord when you step out of the TARDIS in New Zealand and it's green? And he loved it down here. He loved it in his first time that he'd been in New Zealand. And
so you stayed in London. You were writing the scripts in London and faxing them, weren't you? That's correct.
Yeah, they're just in our old dining table in our old flat in London that we kept and went back to. So it was actually a lovely time because my son was just born. I mean, he was he might have been, and he's called Tom. So maybe it's interesting, isn't it? The connection. Tom was very young. He wasn't walking. He actually, while we were there, he got up on his feet and took his first steps. So what was lovely about it, there's our Tom and Tom Senior eventually met down here in Auckland, and I think we'd finished filming. Everything was a success. The powers that be at the client, who had a massive motor launch, took us out on Auckland Harbour, and my wife and I scooted along to West Haven. We had Tom in the pram, and they were almost ready to leave. We had to step over onto the boat, and I wasn't going to do that with Tom in the pram in case we dropped the pram. So I picked up Tom, our Tom, and there was Tom Baker standing on the stern going, "Give me the child." So I handed Tom, who was like this, to this great character, all
how brilliant,
like a linen suit, and picked him up. And I didn't see Tom for about another half an hour later. Tom Baker just carried him around the boat for the whole the beginning. Tom, my son, is now 28.
Yeah.
And, has heard this story many times, but yeah.
So you came back to New Zealand after faxing them through, and then what sort of process happened after arriving back in Auckland? You obviously went back to the advertising agency, got in touch with the superannuation services, and what sort of process happened then from that point on then?
Trying to remember now, but really the clients just has approved the scripts by that stage. Where I was still in the UK, but they had obviously approved them. The production company Tiger Films had brought in John. John had the scripts. They would have been building the straight away building the studio. That we had the rights to the TARDIS, so they made the scale model of the TARDIS, and of course, this is a professional film company with professional art directors and craftsmen, and they know how to make something look at very, very real. And whoever did that, I wish I knew, but took great pains to make sure that it was exactly like the original, or the version that was in the Tom's era. And we had to make some, like, our own screwdriver and a few kind of science-y, fiction-y kind of things that he could kind of use. And I think I named them. I can't remember what I named them now, but they just
Beryllian time transformer.
That's what it was. Yeah. It was just,
it's stuck in my mind for 30 years or something.
And someone made them, out of like nuts and bolts and tape and black, and you would never know, but it looked great. And but the set was obviously, like all sets, only one-sided and no ceiling, and that's where all the lights are coming down. And but they did a great job with the whole, the console, etc. It was all sort of working with screens that, I think they made it exactly as it was in his day, it was
very good.
Yeah,
they're known as the best, from what I can gather, the best adverts copying the series. They're quite well known. There's a lot of time and effort went
highly regarded
to get them right, and to get everything right, and the wording right. So did you have any sort of reference material? That's one question I've been asked to ask you. Did you go to any reference books, or was it just in your head of what you remember from watching them as a child?
No, it was just the film company. It has to be said that there's a lot of people who get involved in something like this. There were the film crew itself. It'd be a dozen or so people. You got like.
Well, I can answer this bit for you, because this is where I come into the story. Back in, it would have been late '96. It would have been. I was contacted by I think it was the managing director of Tiger Films.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and I was running the New Zealand Doctor Who fan club at the time, and they must have got my contact details from somewhere. So they got in touch and they said, "Hey, we're short of Doctor Who reference material. We're making these ads. You can't tell anyone." It was very confidential, but they really wanted to find out if I could help them out with any material. So I was okay, right? How can I help? And so I had this book, the Doctor Who Technical Manual, which has inside it illustrations of the TARDIS and, crucially, dimensions of the police box and things like that. So I was furiously photocopying stuff and sending it off to them, possibly by fax in '96. I can't quite remember what the transmission would have been, because I don't think we would have been emailing each other. And also, the other thing, crucially, I sent them was a copy of the Paul McGann movie, which had just recently screened for the first time, the one that was made in Canada earlier that year, and that actually was the basis of the console that they built. It wasn't a Tom Baker style console; it was the Paul McGann console was the main basis for it, because it's got that television that pulls down from the top, but on the scissor. That's from the Paul McGann movie. So they based a lot of the design of the interior of the TARDIS on the Paul McGann movie, and the exterior police box is on the dimensions from that book that I just showed you. So that was beginning of my involvement. Obviously, I didn't know you at the time, Richard. I was just obviously just being contacted by this person in Tiger Films. You may be able to tell me who that was. I don't remember the name, and that's where I became involved.
He was a lovely man, and the name escapes me, but he was very well known in the industry. And it was I don't know how old he was, but he was fantastic. And we all had a big barbecue out at his house somewhere in the countryside, and Tom obviously was the star attraction.
And so, Paul, You
Yeah,
you remember telling me a story that you were working at Whitcoulls at the time, and some gentleman
that's
came up to
right.
you and said, "Oh, I have you got any Tom Baker videos? Because I shouldn't
You
tell
know,
you
that
this,
could be right.
but we need some reference material for a commercial." And as luck would and fluke would have it, you, of course, running the Doctor Who fan club of New Zealand, there you are talking to a person that's going to make an advert of Tom
Do you,
coming from
do you know?
Britain.
Do you know, Nigel? You've got a much better memory than I have because I completely forgotten that detail.
So fast forward then to actually making the ads. So were you on set, Richard, at the time, and how did you
Yes,
observe the
yes.
proceedings going ahead?
Well, it was great. Shoots are always fantastic, especially when you've got a great set like that. But as the writer, you're just you're behind the director, you're behind the camera. You're sort of only making sure that the talent, or in this case, Tom, is remembering his lines and not going off and making his own up, which he tended to do. And I didn't need to tell him how to deliver these lines. I mean, I'd written them with him in mind. So it was just, it was, gosh, the natural craft and the expertise of his as an actor just shone through. And you can sense it when you watch. I mean, they're just ads, they're not movies or anything. They've been beautifully done, I have to say. And they were great fun to write and to film, but his persona just makes it. You could never fake that with someone who looked like, was playing the role of a Time Lord. It's just Tom Baker, this great, well, he was a legend, and everyone, whenever in between shots or afterwards, everyone just sort of kind of floated around him, and he loved a gathering, and so he could just tell some more stories. The stranger, the better. I actually, the first time, it was about the first or second time I met him, I think it was actually when he just got off the plane, and he said, first thing he said to me was, "People who chew chewing gum, they're mad. They look mad, don't they? They're insane. They look completely nuts." And you sort of go, right. The chewing gum, yes. And even now I think about it, when I see someone chewing gum, it does look a bit odd. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know. But there's a, I haven't thought, anyway.
So you also went to Mount Eden as well. Was that the first thing that was shot, or was it the studio stuff that was shot?
I think it was the end.
Right.
And oddly enough, I mean, it probably would have been, we would have been waiting for a weather window. It might have been while we were in the studio. It could have been bucketing with the rain outside. But I do remember early morning, and they always are early morning starts, getting up to that little car park, and the TARDIS was already there. And then, you always, at that hour, there's always dog walkers and people running, and the look on their face was just sort of, everyone recognizes a TARDIS.
Mm.
And it was a 3-dimensional, you could walk in, walk out, had the door, and so it looked incredible.
Did it attract a crowd of onlookers, or were you left to your own devices? Do you remember?
Well, we didn't have too many onlookers, but people are generally a little bit shy on that. And it was positioned right on a ridge, so the land dropped down behind, so you didn't get anyone walking behind. And
Gotcha.
if they were walking, they would just come and stand, they'd be respectful and stand behind the camera. And actually, I think Tom was, for the scene, he's inside there. So he has just to open up the door and sort of go, "Oh, yes," in New Zealand, which was a great moment. It was all done in a couple of hours.
Really, that fast?
Yeah, well, I mean, he just nailed it. So we had to move quickly and get on to the next scene, or back down to the studio, or
Right.
it might have been a wrap. I don't know. Actually, I can't. It's so long ago.
Can you remember roughly how long the whole thing took, the shooting block? Was it done in a week, a day, the studio stuff?
No, I'd say we got through in about 2.5 days, maybe. Might have been 3. There were a lot. I mean, it's interesting. There were a lot of scripts to do, which would normally, you'd think actually would be longer than 3 days. But I've got a feeling he just delivered his lines, and he just nailed it. And no one was going to say to this great actor, this famous person. Oh, can we just
Mm.
do that again with more feeling? It was just, I wasn't going to say that. There was actually, when I look at the ads now, there's actually some mistakes. There's only one, actually, I have to say, where his eye line
Mm.
drift off, and we never noticed it because this is all shot on film, so you don't get to see it until
Right.
way
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
And there's no video split where you can be watching it. It's like the cameraman, the DOP, is looking through the lens and is going to spot these sort of things, but he actually missed it, and we saw it in the edit, and that's why my suggestion was you could see this sort of crackling electricity over the top of the screen. Well, it was just to distract your own eye from seeing this eye line.
Oh yes.
I did notice that, I have to say.
Yeah, it was like, oh no, how are we going to fix this? And there was no other way. There was no other shot.
There was a lot of grading as well, post grading. I noticed because I've got the blooper reel, which is untreated, and then there's the transmission version, which is very heavily graded, and it's crushed blacks and very heavily processed.
And that's what you can do with film. I mean, you can do it with video too, or digital video these days. I mean, the grade is everything. When you see it without the grade, it looks pretty ordinary. And then those guys go to work and they will spend days on it, and crushing the blacks, and it just gives it that sort of filmic look.
Paul, any more questions before we move on to the success?
Well,
how successful were the ads?
I was sitting beside you in studio on the first day, Richard.
Yeah,
very long time ago, and I don't expect you to remember that, but because of the reference work that I given Tiger Films, they invited me to come along and watch the recording, and I could only get one day off work, so I came along on the first day of recording in studio. I was invited along to the shoot on One Tree Hill and everything, but unfortunately I couldn't get any more time off. So just that first day, I was there all day watching, and I remember chatting to you briefly about, I say, I introduced myself, and you explained that you were the writer. I didn't remember your name, but I did remember you introducing yourself as the writer of the thing. So
I remember, and actually you do look familiar. So I mean, it's
it's a very long time ago.
Incredible. I mean, we talk about faxing, scripts and faxing things, and the Whitcool story, and the fact that we're now all these years later after something that probably could easily have just gone on air and then disappeared, but has somehow, like, in true Time Lord style, has actually had a life of its own. And I didn't even know until Nigel, we got in touch, and I don't know. Do you want to talk about that? That's kind of
we'll end up on that. But I wanted to ask you about, and it's completely slipped my mind now.
If I could add to what I was just saying, one of the things that I because I was running the fan club at the time, I wrote up my memories of the day at the time for our club magazine, and I read back over those. So, I am cheating a little bit with my memories because I obviously wrote them down at the time. So it's not stuff that I would have recalled otherwise. But I do remember, Richard, there was an incident, and this is because I wrote about this. It struck me at the time, where Tom wanted to change lines while you're recording, but he deferred to you, which I thought was quite impressive. You've got this great actor who's basically going, "Sir, would it be okay?" And I remember you sticking up for your lines and going, "No, I think we'll stick to it, Tom. We'll stick to what I've written."
I remember. I'm very particular about the words I write, but and I can't remember what it was. I'd have to look back at the ads, and it'll probably remind me. But yeah, it was quite a moment where you have to sort of walk forward and tell Tom, actually, no, look, can we just stick to? And he went, yes, absolutely, that's fine. And then he nailed it, and we were moving on.
So I've just remembered the story now. So the second coincidence was I worked for New Zealand's national broadcaster. And at the time, we sent a film crew out to do a news item on this advert.
That's right.
And a friend of mine was working at the network, and he said, "You'll never guess what footage I've got." I went, "What?" "I've got all the rushes of the the news footage. So I thought I've got one chance to record this because obviously it'll be erased, and only the one that goes to air will be saved. So I've got the behind the scenes news footage as well of when the news cameraman came and recorded the clip. So I'll just move on to that anyway, to how the adverts were received. Obviously, they went out on radio, went out on TV, and newspaper adverts, weren't they? So
They were.
how did it go?
They were actually full page newspaper ads in the Herald and the Dominion and the whatever, the national papers, and it's quite funny. One of them, I've actually looked it up. I don't have copies of them anymore, but I did work with an art director who put these ads together. I just wrote the words, and he did the photographic shoot with Tom and a really good photographer, Steve, who also was an ex-London photographer and who knew how to deal with sort of big famous film stars. But there's one of the ads which talks about the future, and here we are in the future. But it's I've actually got it here on the screen. It says, when you've traveled through time as much as I have, there's not much that surprises you. Japan winning the Rugby World Cup in 2032 raised an eyebrow at the time. And I always think, because I just made it up, 2032, that's far enough ahead. And Japan, no, Japan would never win the Rugby World Cup. Well, they're not a bad team now. Probably not going to win it this year, but 2032, I might be making a big mistake. And and there were some other things, that it's a timeless piece. It's obviously online, and the radio ads, I can't remember exactly how they went, but it was all
would
the
radio ads have been just sound copies of the television ads, or would they have been recorded specifically for radio, do you think?
It would have been recorded just for radio, and
would they be done in studio at the same time as you're recording the television ones, or would they be done?
No, it would have been a separate day, the next morning or before we get it off and into an audio studio.
Yeah,
I can't actually remember how they went. Funnily enough, it's a long time ago.
Maybe they lost the time.
Yeah, I just don't recall. But obviously, if there were radio ads, I must have written some.
If anyone's got them, send them in. We'd love to hear them, because I've never heard them. So
But yes, the art director Wayne Gillies has actually got quite a bit of he's got the whole shoot on old style film, so big format. Not 35 mil or anything like that, and he's got them in a box in his garage. And I spoke to him. He's overseas at the moment, but I spoke to him and I said, Wayne, we've got to get these out of the box. Someone will, want to see them. And they're the shots that were used in the newspaper ads, and but they're great. It's the full costume and everything.
I think we need to talk about the costume briefly, because I remember. You can probably add a lot more to this, Richard, but what I distinctly remember in studio is when Tom first arrived on set, he was given a choice of two costumes. You had a grey coat and his traditional multicolored scarf, and then there was his maroon coat with the red scarf, which he did end up wearing, and the other one just got put on the hat stand that was on the side of the console set. I remember that quite clearly as being what happened, and it was left up to Tom as to which costume he was going to wear.
Which one he felt most comfortable in. He did talk about that because he knew his costumes inside out, and his wardrobe lady, who's, I think her name was Judy or
June Hudson.
June, that's right. June, and I met her, as I said earlier, at the BBC, and we went in off the side street and into a back door, and we were going through all these old corridors to meet her, and then she got these items out of boxes and out of deep storage.
Yes.
But we left that up to him. I mean, it was whatever he was happy with was going to be fine with me. It's a great look, though, isn't it?
It is. And yes, that was the costume that Tom wore in his last season on television, the one he chose to wear. because
Yeah.
his costume did change over the course of his television run. So I think maybe he thought because that was the one he'd worn last when he was the Doctor, that made
Yeah.
sense to carry on with that look.
Yeah. Continuity.
Yeah.
You know, that's the actor in him again. And no, we were thrilled. At the end result, I mean, bar that little slip up that I mentioned, which was really nothing, the overall effect and to see them again. And now, I've been in the business writing so many ads and I've done some big campaigns and won lots of awards, but for creativity and things, but that campaign still is like a special place because of the fact that it was Tom Baker. You don't get to often work with people like that, but the fact that it's stayed around for so long, and how was it received? It was actually received with great kind of like, how did you pull that off? And I remember an ex-former colleague came up to me and years later and said, "Was that you?" Oh, how did that was incredible.
Yeah.
Both people in those days, even though New Zealand advertising was pretty good and there was rising up on the world stage in terms of quality, most people thought this was an overseas production, even though it's for a New Zealand company.
And
I think too that there's the thing that you got to remember that Doctor Who wasn't being made at the time that the ads were made, so people, even particularly over Doctor Who fans around the world, internationally, were desperate for any new Doctor Who content. So the fact that Tom was back in costume playing the Doctor on a TARDIS, we had the proper set and the proper police box and everything, and it looked like it was real Doctor Who, even though it was television ads. That excited a great deal of interest internationally.
Yeah. Well, even when I found out that they were still out there, my own daughter, she's 20, she was 25, just turned 26, and she's a big Doctor Who fan. Particularly with the most recent iteration of Doctor Who being a woman, and actually he was in one of that was in a global. Someone put a video together of everyone around the world talking to camera and sort of welcoming this great new female Doctor Who, and Izzy's in it.
Oh, great!
Yeah, I know, it's kind of weird. So it's not again. No, and being my daughter, she's not that impressed about me having written these things or anything like that.
Oh, I could have asked that.
She just goes, "Oh, whatever that." But her friends are like, "Oh, wow!" They know about it.
So just talk to me about the NZSS, the New Zealand Superannuation Services. They were part of Sovereign, weren't they? So what actually happened to them after the campaign?
Well, there was obviously everything launched, and they had an office in Newmarket, and that's where the I think the TARDIS was in there, set up in the middle. It was very much selling people into the idea of superannuation, and of course now we have KiwiSaver, and so normal now. But back in the day, it was a totally new idea, and I think they were quite they had the right idea. They were quite hard sell, so they would get people in. Into that branch, or they would sell over the phone perhaps as well, and through the print ads, which had a cutout coupon that you would send in. This is no emails or websites, or you'd ring the number 0800 TARDIS, which was a completely new kind of.
That's right. I've forgotten about that.
That's right. Yeah.
Telephone numbers. No one had ever heard about that before. And they'd get sold into these. Saving for retirement things and preparing for the future. But I don't think the public were still kind of not easy about this whole idea of saving for yourself for the future. And I don't know what happened in later years and how long it lasted, but it certainly went out there with a bang and had a huge amount of interest. And I'm not sure. I didn't actually. I didn't sign up.
So we'll just fast forward to sort of the present, really.
Well,
So
it's worth mentioning,
yeah,
Nigel, before you
yep,
do that,
yep,
we did have a club event at the
yeah,
at the showrooms at the Newmarket offices of the Superannuation Services.
we did.
So I think you were involved with setting that up, Nigel. You
Yeah,
you were there,
so Paul and
yeah.
I, we had a little sort of day on the TARDIS set in Newmarket.
Mm.
They were kind enough to allow us to have a sort of a day on the set. And also we did a little mini convention in Newmarket. Tom kindly gave his time, and it was at that
Mission
point,
Bay. It was in Mission Bay.
Mission Bay, and I
Yeah.
was given
Mm.
a video of all the ads and the
That's right.
bloopers. And the lady who gave it to me said, "Don't let this sort of out of your sight."
Mm.
Um, and kind of fast forward to a bit more of the present, the BBC contacted me through Paul Scoones and said, we think that these ads would make an excellent extra set for the season 18 Blu-ray release. So luckily, these tapes that I've been holding on to all these years, I digitized them and emailed them to the BBC and put them on YouTube. And then Richard saw the clips and then contacted me. So
Oh, fantastic.
that's sort of wrapping up the story, really. And
Yeah.
I mean, I jump in because it's quite an odd one. I had just come out of surgery, and I was not sleeping very well. I was, uncomfortable, and of course, I'm in this in the spare room, and so I didn't annoy people. But I had my laptop, and I could just go online and pass through, the hours because I just was not sleeping well, as I said, and then and landed on the ads, and then suddenly noticed the comments, which were all quite really lovely and glowing, and I'm going, gosh, this is the work that I did all those years ago, and it's generating so much interest. I think there was one that was, this is the, Nigel, these are the ads that you had put on because they were the good quality ones.
Yeah.
There was like 70 or 80 comments from around the world, and people saying, why can't the current writers, I shouldn't mention any names, but why can't the current writers write as well as this? And I'm going, wow, that's something. But of course, at 2 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the morning, you start digging around, and that's how I found Nigel. I found you, and I think I sent you a note through. I stalked you somehow
to YouTube. I couldn't believe it, actually, because Paul and I have been hanging on to these ads, and they come into our lives every few years. Someone mentions them, or someone wants to know more about them, and then finally we get the kind of the head guy or the writer contacting me. The missing link. Yeah, it was a great moment. It was like he said, "Oh, if you're interested, contact me," and I'm like, "Yes, of course, I'm interested."
It's like I said, Richard, all these years I've had the memory of talking to you at the event, but the frustration not remembering your name.
Yeah.
So I had no way of chasing you up to do this interview until obviously you got in touch with Nigel.
Oh, wow. And then time moves on, and slowly, and then this little small world that we live in, we end up doing this.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And the line on those ads was time is everything, and it so is. Maybe we were just meant to be this campaign. It was just meant to be written for a company that is long since gone, and people can't. But the ads remain, and so does Tom. Immortalized as as the Doctor again.
Obviously, one of the byproducts of me giving that reference material to Tiger Films was that not only did I get the invite along to watch the recording, which was fantastic, but they also came up to me and said, "Hey, would you like Tom for the day?" Which sort of blew my mind. It's kind of like, what?
So, Richard, were you there? Were you there at the
at the Mission Bay?
Mission Bay, yeah.
No, I didn't. I heard about it though.
Right.
We couldn't quite believe our luck because we only had a couple of weeks to put it together. Unfortunately, one of the people who I knew quite well had a church hall. His father was a local vicar, and so we were able to get that at a very short notice. And we had to sort of just put out a very urgent notice to all the Doctor Who fans saying, "Come along and see Tom." And there are obviously a lot of very skeptical people. Why would Tom Baker be? Because of course the ads hadn't screened at that time, so no one really knew he was here. And so we obviously, put that all together. And then there was the risk too, the pre-cell phone days. Tom Tom had verbally agreed to show up on the day, and we had a packed hall full of people, and he didn't turn up. He was
Oh,
late. He was
Mm.
half an hour late. And what had happened apparently was when he was driving along the waterfront to Mission Bay, the woman, I think, who was a representative from Tiger Films, he basically said to her, I want to stop and have a look at Kelly Tarleton's along the way. Oh, I want to stop and have a look at the waterfront. Because he's Tom,
Yeah,
and of
yeah.
course they do what Tom wants. But there's us all fretting at the hall, and everyone's starting to mutiny and go, "Is this a con? Have we been lured here because you say Tom's going to be here and he isn't?" So it was a huge relief to me when he finally pulled up in the driveway. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
reputation was almost in tatters by that point.
I
Liz
didn't know.
knows.
I didn't know that. Hmm.
Yeah, and he was great. He was absolutely just a consummate professional, had everyone in the palm of his hands. I I had a list of questions if no one from the audience contributed, but he just launched into his repartee, and he'd asked me beforehand, incidentally, it's quite an interesting question. When I talked to him about this on the day of recording, when I was in the studio, he said, "Oh, look, I'll come along to this thing, but I really need to know, is it going to be adults or children? Because I have two different deliveries and two different personas. And if it's children, I'll play the doctor. And if it's adults, I'll be Tom Baker. So which is it?" He really needed me to tell him. And I said, "Tom, we're an adult fan club. It's not really, young kids." And he goes, "Good, I prefer that." So yeah, he was very uncensored, Tom, on the day.
Actually, one thing that popped into my mind, which I was, this is years ago, but after having, it may be sort of 10 years
Mm,
after the shoot, and I was in a bookstore, and his autobiography had come out, and it was just there
yes.
on the shelf, and I thought, oh, and picked it up and opened it onto the first chapter, and there was the story, him telling the story of
Yeah,
getting a phone call from his agent about going and shooting some commercials in
that's
New
right.
Zealand, and I always thought, well, as you know, I'm a writer and I've written books as well, and it's but to be actually in one in
Mm,
that sense, written by Tom Baker was a new experience, and I bought it, and it's somewhere, it's in the house
yeah.
here. Um, but I always wanted, I thought I would go back to, because he was so nice, and his wife,
Mm,
Sue, was lovely. And we corresponded for a few months afterwards, and then things
yeah.
just quieted down. And she sent me a photograph of Tom holding my Tom, who was only just a baby,
Oh, how
and
lovely.
it was signed. And I cannot find where that photograph
Oh,
has gone. It's priceless, but
yeah.
for us anyway, there's no. But
Mm.
anyway, it's gone somewhere. It may be in a box somewhere in the house, but anyway, I always thought it would be lovely to head back to the UK and go and visit him in the countryside where he lives, and I think it was
Yeah.
Kent or somewhere like that. And but we never did it, and I regret that. I'm sure he would have actually probably opened the door with open arms, and we would have been sitting there having a crazy conversation again.
Yeah.
And you know, because obviously it meant a lot to him as well to play the role
How
again.
how wonderful. How
Funnily
wonderful.
enough, I went to a Longleat convention where the Doctor Who exhibition was at the time, about 2000, and I went up to him and said, "Do you remember coming to New Zealand?" And I was there at the convention, and he said, "Oh yes." He said it was a very long interview line for autographs, as far as I remember that.
It was, wasn't it? It snaked all the way
Yeah,
down the
so
drive.
yeah, so he obviously remembered it, and but obviously he's a larger than life character, and he's got so much going on in his
Mm,
life, isn't he? He's just he's his mind's
Yeah,
everywhere. So
yeah.
so we've got 2 minutes left. So yeah, no, thanks again. And Richard, I think that once you're part of the Doctor Who fan thing around the world, it never leaves you. You're sucked into this world now. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, can't wait for an interview for an invitation to America or England for.
well, you never
yes.
know.
I'd gladly go and
You never
talk.
know.
So, Richard, thank you very much for giving us your time and story. It's been very interesting and fascinating. And I'm sure this isn't the end of the story, by the way. I'm sure you'll be hearing from me a bit more in the future. And Paul, thank you for your insight, as
Oh,
always, through your knowledge. Thank you.
thank
Pleasure.
you.